It depends upon what the meaning of the word is. Yeah.
That's just the penalty of having neighbors. All right, here we go. New episode.
Like you've done something wrong.
Yeah, exactly. If you have to have neighbors, you're being punished for something. Anybody, and just having neighbors to begin with is a punishment. All right, there we go. New episode. I'm Ed,
I'm Peter.
and today is the letter.
X.
And X is a tricky word to come up with words for, so I think we did really well in doing this.
You came up with a lot more than I did, to be fair.
You came up with ones that I didn't come up with, so it was a good match.
Two heads are better than
Two
one.
heads are better than one. All right, here we go. The cup is shaking. Say when.
All right, dude.
You know what's funny is this is another one of those ones where I thought maybe because it's longer, it's gonna get drawn out. Like, I have this theory that the longer ones are easier to
That
pull
makes
out.
sense. Sure.
The word of the week is X-rated movies, which is 3 words, I suppose.
That's 3 words.
That is 3 words. But you know what? It's hard to come up with things that start with X, and I think I did pretty well. X-rated movies. Peter, would you like to kick off? What do you know about X-rated movies?
I know entirely too much about
Oh, that's a great start. All right, go on.
I took a course in university called Sex in Cinema.
Okay.
And it was one of the most interesting courses I've ever taken. And it was about the history of X-rated movies, and then got way deeper and way weirder after that. But yeah, so from both a consumer point of view and an academic perspective, I think I know a fair amount about the topic.
It's funny you say that because X-rated movies have been conflated with their association with pornographic movies. People think of X-rated movies as pornographic movies, which is not the case. It's very much not the case. So, you know me. I'm a film history nerd. I love early film stuff. So if you'll indulge me, I'm going to give a little breakdown on the origin of movie ratings, if that's acceptable to you. So, in the early days of movies, there were no laws. You could do pretty much anything. One of the first movies was a guy snorting cocaine. And then there was a man kissing his wife. And then it took about 2 years before people just started taping very, 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 very lurid things. It became all about sex and naked dancing, and all of these things were allowed to be put on film. There was no restriction to it. There was no laws against it. And in the sort of mid-1920s, Hollywood started going through these really public scandals. There started being scandals about people being murdered, people disappearing, Fatty Arbuckle supposedly assaulting and killing a woman. And Hollywood had a really, really, really bad image. And so the government said, okay, look, we've got to start reining this in because they have absolute free reign. We need to do something about it. So in the mid-1920s, they put out this honor code. And the honor code was, don't have drug use, don't have sex perversion, don't have nudity, don't have... One of them was ridicule of the clergy. You're not allowed to ridicule the clergy. You can't have sex hygiene. You can't have anything to do with menstruation or pregnancy or all that sort of thing. But it wasn't law. It was suggested. And it had the exact opposite effect that all the people making movies said to each other, what would be funny would be if we just put absolutely every one of these in our movies. And so they went exactly the opposite way, which is human nature. And so they started packing their movies with sex and scandal and violence and desecrations of the flag and desecrations of the clergy. There's this cartoon series called Flip the Frog, which was created by this guy Ub Iwerks, which is famous for just doing all of these things. He would pack all these things in. I'm rambling already, so if you're not with me, stay with me. Anyway, then in the 1930s, they thought, okay, well that backfired. The honor system backfired. We need to do something that's actually law. So they got, and this is hilarious to me, they got the Postmaster General to institute a code of conduct in films. There's a guy called Will Hayes. Yeah, go on.
Okay. It's interesting that you bring up the Postmaster General.
Okay.
Because that came up recently. Well, not so recently, but during the sort of last sort of throes of the most recent U.S. election.
Okay.
And there was like one of Trump's dudes was hiding in a yacht off the Atlantic coast somewhere. Do you remember this?
No, I don't know this.
Blip on the news radar?
No.
So there was a thing, and I guess like because of where he was, like he couldn't really be arrested because he was outside of whatever jurisdiction, and the New York prosecutor's office, which is sort of like a generally left leaning prosecutorial jurisdiction, sent the postmaster general to arrest this guy because the postmaster general's office has, like many other branches of the U.S. government, their own police.
Yeah.
And nobody ever thinks of the post office as having police.
USPIS.
In the US,
they're called
they're
USPIS.
extremely, extremely powerful. Like they have powers that are like kind of like FBI, CIA level kind of shit. And because they're the post office, they can cross jurisdictions really, really easily, right? Because that's what you need to be able to do to deliver a letter. But it's also the case if you need to deliver a summons.
Yeah.
So if you really need to nail someone to the wall, you get the postmaster general to do it.
Okay, well, I thought it was funny that they got the postmaster general to do the code, but okay, makes sense. So they got this guy. His name's Will Hayes, and he instituted the code. The code is now law. It's not suggested, and this lasts for about 30 years. But then a little while later, it starts to depreciate. It starts to crumble. This thing. And Johnson, who's president at the time, hires this guy called Jack Valenti. If you've never heard of this guy called Jack Valenti, he's a really interesting guy. So you look up this guy called Jack Valenti. Jack Valenti does away with the Hays Code, and he introduces the Motion Picture Association of America, which is what we have now. The Motion Picture Association of America goes back to having suggested ratings and not mandatory ratings, which is something people don't actually know, is that movies don't have to be rated. Movies can elect to not be rated. It's just very difficult to get distributed in a theater. And so they institute G, M, R, and X. X is for things that show extremes. They show extremes of sex, they show extremes of violence. But because it's so vague, so many movies start falling into the X-rated category. Like A Clockwork Orange is released as X. Army of the Dead is released as X. Midnight Cowboy is released as X and wins the Academy Award for Best Picture. And here's where the story gets fantastic. The X that they use is not a copyrighted symbol. It's a public symbol. So, all of these very entrepreneuring pornographers look at this and they say, the X gets a lot of attention and it's not a copyrighted symbol. Let's just slap the X on our movies. And then another pornographer says, you know what would be funny? Would be if, to really sell it, we did double X. And then another guy was like, okay, but hang on, how about this? Let's do triple X. We're so bad that our movies are rated XXX. And this is where the Pornographic Association starts to come in.
That's awesome. I had no idea.
Yeah.
That's really, really interesting.
So that lasted until 1990. And then in 1990, they realized, look, the X system is not working. If anything, it's appealing to people rather than repelling people. And then they instituted the system that we have now, which is... in America, G, PG, PG-13, R, and NC-17. There's the little brief footnotes story of the X-rating.
And it's all because of that whole, like, don't push this button.
Yeah. It's so true. If they just left well enough alone, it probably would have fizzled out. But because they said don't do it, people had to do it.
Right? It's like you said, it's human nature.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
I need to actually. We have kind of a rule that we don't research things while we're doing it. We want this to be off the cuff, but I want to find the list. The list that they proposed. I'm typing it in now. The list that they proposed just sounds funny nowadays. It's probably not funny, but just okay. So here's the original list. This is the what is it? June 29, 1927. This is the one that they suggested, but that became a bad idea. Number 1, pointed profanity by either title or lip. This includes the word God, Lord, Jesus, Christ, hell, SOB, damn, Gawd, spelled G-A-W-D, and every other profane and vulgar expression, however it may be spelled. Number 2, any licentious or suggestive nudity, in fact or in silhouette, and any lecherous or licentious notice thereof by any characters in the picture. What I love about that is that it says it's wrong to show nudity, and it's also wrong to show somebody looking at nudity.
Right.
Okay, number 3. Any illegal traffic in drugs. Number 4. Any inference of sex perversion. Number 5, and number 5 is really grim. Number 5 is depictions of white slavery.
Ooh.
Yeah. Yeah. Going on. Number 6, miscegenation, also terrible. Number 7, sex hygiene and venereal diseases. Number 8, scenes of actual childbirth. Number 9, I agree with quite firmly, children's sex organs. Number 10, ridicule of the clergy. Number 11, willful offense to any nation, race, or creed. And I think that it's ironic that they say willful offense to any nation, race, or creed when they themselves have just banned white slavery and miscegenation.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is just fucking weird. And I guess we're decades past, the sort of cultural zeitgeist. So it's all gonna sound really strange to us, because hopefully it sounds strange to us, because hopefully we've kind of evolved a little since 1926. Yeah.
Yeah, I think. I'd like to think. But then you look around and you think maybe we haven't. Maybe some people haven't. So. Yeah.
But then, ratings, I suppose, like the sort that you just described, whether it's an X rating or whatever they decided in the 90s, N17 or whatever. How important do you think that is now that we don't really consume media the same way we used to, right? Like now everything's on the internet. If you want to watch something really perverted, it's on the internet. If you want to watch something really violent, it's on the internet. If you want to watch something really fucking wholesome, it's also on the internet. So it's accessible to anyone, regardless of their age, at any time, and simply limited to their technological prowess.
What makes you think
what value do ratings have anymore now that distribution is kind of irrelevant? Like you don't need a studio to pick up your film.
Those people in like 1910s were living in a pre-code era, and they had ready access to everything. Maybe we're just living in the pre-code internet. Maybe the internet will be much more censored in the future. Maybe we'll look back on this and be like, wow, you really used to be able to access anything on the internet before the censorship came in.
I guess, but I mean, like, there are attempts to do that. I mean, like, I don't know if anybody remembers Tumblr anymore, or uses Tumblr anymore, but Tumblr decided it was going to purge itself of any erotic content, any nudity, any sex-related content, and basically their entire user base shriveled up and died because everyone was using Tumblr for porn. Absolutely every person on Tumblr had some little pocket on their Tumblr profile that had some sort of pornographic content. Okay, I'm exaggerating, but still, it was the Wild West essentially of pornographic material on the internet. And as soon as the company said, okay, we're putting a stop to this, the entire platform collapsed.
It's a healthy collapse, though. I mean, if there's that much, people sharing images of themselves, I'm sure there's a lot of images that got out there that people wanted purged. Had to come from somewhere.
Yeah, I guess that's a valid point.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose it's for parents, the rating system at the moment. Like, if you're looking on Netflix and you want to see what's suitable for your kids, you can put the kids filter on, or for our parents when they were buying VHS tapes, they would have.
But as well as I do from having been a kid that you're better with tech than your parents are.
Yeah.
So typically it's going to be a parent asking their kid how to turn the child filter off on the Netflix account, not the other way around.
Yeah, sure. Well, not if it's like a 3-year-old. If it's like a 14-year-old maybe, but not like a 3-year-old. It's funny, you can see these really distinct moments in film history and TV history. Like if you look at the movies that came out sort of pre-1920, they're mad, they're batshit insane. And then when you look to sort of the 30s and 40s and early 50s, when the code was in full effect, movies become really saccharine. They become The Wizard of Oz and Busby Berkeley and How Green Is My Valley. And then you see the next phase, which is where the code starts to crumble but is not fully gone, and you have these underground movies coming up like John Waters and Easy Rider and I'm trying to think of the name of another one, but for some reason I can't come up with a third. Anyway, you start seeing this underground revolution, and then when that starts to fully crumble and you get the new system coming in, you get the sort of late 70s, early 80s, and you really see in the late 70s, early 80s, there's a lot of nudity, there's a lot of toplessness in 80s movies, there's a lot of swearing in 80s movies, And then in 1990, when the NC-17 rating comes in and it gets clipped again, you can see the sudden change in 90s movies again become very saccharine. It's funny seeing these patterns.
Yeah, that's true. I can identify with that for sure.
Yeah. I mean, what was the first decade that you remember consciously watching movies and consciously absorbing movies?
Like the 80s?
So what, late 80s? 88, 89?
Yeah, something like that.
Do you remember them being different to the movies that you ended up seeing in the 90s?
I remember being terrified by E.T. I don't think I've ever seen anything scarier in my life.
You think E.T. probably should have had an NC-17 rating?
Yeah, like when they set up the weird medical tube tents and you've got the guys in the hazmat suits running around, I was so terrified.
Peter Coyote.
I'd never seen anything worse in my life.
But that nowadays would have, like, you know, scenes of a frightening nature would be one of the things that they would put on the ratings tag. There's so many things now. There's, like, it says tobacco.
There's so many things. It's funny, like when I look at, you know, when I'm watching something on Netflix or whatever, they'll warn me that I'm going to see somebody smoking.
Yeah, the tobacco use one is an interesting one.
Okay, weird.
And then at the end of the movie, it has to say nobody received any compensation for the depiction of tobacco products in this film.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, what do you do? Like, you know, I'm not a parent. I probably never will be. But, like, what do you do if you have a kid, right? And you're really concerned about your kid seeing the tobacco use in a film, right? I can understand that. That makes sense to me. Monkey see, monkey do. I guess that's the idea. So what do you do when you go outside? Like, what do you do when you leave the house with your child? Do you prep your child before you open the door to the outside world? You say, now, Johnny, when we go out there, you may or may not see somebody smoking. And if you do, I want you to close your eyes real tight and pretend that you never saw it. Like, is that, like, why is it reasonable to do when watching a film, but unreasonable to do in real life?
I think it's because kids will model their behavior on people they see in movies, but they probably won't model their behavior on strangers on the street. People will model their behavior on people in the movies because they think they're the glamorous superheroes, etc. We want to do what they do, but they're not going to want to do what the guy standing outside Tim Hortons is doing.
That's a really good point.
Yeah. Before we go, I just want to say there is an amazing self-referential joke in a terrible movie. There was a movie called Be Cool, which was the sequel to Get Shorty. Get Shorty was great, Be Cool was terrible. But they have this amazing self-referential joke where he's talking about, he's a movie producer, and he says, you know, nowadays, thanks to the Motion Picture Association of America, you can only say fuck in a movie one time before you get an R rating. Do you believe that? You can only say fuck one time.
That's good.
It's a great line. And it's right at the beginning of the movie as well. Like, opening scene. It's fantastic. Any last thoughts on, do you have a favorite X-rated movie before we go? Not necessarily a porno movie, but like Fritz the Cat or Midnight Cowboy or something.
You know what? I don't necessarily have, I'm not a big movie guy. What I think is fascinating, sort of in an historic sense, is Deep Throat.
Oh yeah, sure.
Because it really changed all sorts of things. We're out of time probably to unpack that, but remind me when we get back to letter D.
Also a very sad story for Linda Lovelace. She had a very bad time after that. Yeah.
But it's like the whole thing around the making of that film, the distribution of that film, how popular that film became, and really, like, it blew American society kind of wide open. It changed everything, and so for that reason, I think it's an important film.
And is possibly, though the numbers are very hard to track, possibly the highest grossing film of all time.
Yeah.
All right, X-rated movies. That's the letter X. I'm Ed.
And I'm Peter.
Do you want to do the quick little rundown
have a great
on
week.
Okay.
And also spend some time thinking about your favorite X-rated movies and leave us a voicemail about them and your memories associated with. And you can do that on our webpage, which is podpage.com/ed-peter. And you can click the button on the right-hand side of the page and, tell us the story.
Leave us a voicemail, fools.
Do it.
Do it. All right. Goodbye.
Bye.